This paradigm of we have today of wanting to label everything and think in a
Mm,
very binary, dualistic way is so embedded in the way we think and relate to one another. And as a child, that was something I grappled with just at a personal level. I was raised by a single mother and I didn't know my biological father till I was like 11 or 12 years old. So I had this sort of question that would lingered in my mind of like, who do I label father in my family tree? I was always terrified of the genealogy project in school because was it my grandfather who was like a predominant male influence, fatherly figure in my life? Was it my eventual adopted father? Was it, so I struggle with the concept of a label. Why do I have to ascribe a label to this relationship? So I always struggle with labels, right, as a child. And then the shift is in categorical thinking. Category theory isn't about labels, like set theory is about, is it in the set or is it not? That set
mm.
theory is sort of the traditional foundation of math for the last 150 years, where we assign things membership, right, based on a label. And category theory is the opposite. It's like describe the role that the thing plays in my life. Like what's the role that I don't care what to call this person. I
Mm.
want to understand what's the relationship they have to me, and can I define things based on the relationship to other things. That's called in category theory, they call it the Yoneda perspective. One of the most powerful results in category theory was this Yoneda lemma, which says you can define an object basically by its relationship to other things rather than trying to define an object by its intrinsic characteristics or its membership to a group.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Love and Philosophy. So, the reason behind this podcast and waymaking and navigability and pretty much everything I've been doing the past 10 years of my life in one way or another could maybe be explained in large part or some part as a motivation to find a new norm of understanding beyond dichotomy, to connect across ways of life and disciplines in love, to understand life's movement or the movement of life as cognitive but not cognitive in the way we've thought. In other words, to notice the pattern beyond the paradox. That's how I've been thinking of it lately. Weirdly, though, and challengingly, to notice this pattern beyond the paradox or to explore this space beyond dichotomy doesn't mean we invalidate or erase those experiences that we call paradoxes or dichotomies or opposites or either ors, which is part of why it's so hard to explain. It's a little bit like trying to use dichotomy to get beyond it. Our language itself is sort of built in with all of this, so it's like trying to find the beginning and end of a fractal. In any case, what has been extremely helpful and also difficult in terms of my learning curve is to try to find mathematical understandings of how to do this. Mathematical theories expressing how many valid paths can lead to the same place in a multi-scale level of space and time and areas of our lives. So, in other words, to try to get past thinking in linear ways about paths and spaces while also understanding that many different kinds of paths in these many different spaces can be understood in common. That's part of all this philosophy and science. We're communicating with one another so as to expand what's possible. But at the same time, as we do that, we perpetuate what is possible. So we can never pin down something objective in one measurement or one definition, because the measurement itself is a change. So you see this kind of process of what comes to be called dichotomy or dialectic or paradox or something, but is this dynamic movement. So how can we understand this? How can we understand no one assessment or measurement is objective from every spatiotemporal position, but at the same time, measurement and assessment, when we know that that's what it is probably the most robust and meaningful way we can learn and share and know, at least outside of art and those sorts of creations like music and novels and things like that, which are also very important too, and are actually not disconnected from this, which would be a whole other theme. But today I want to think more about these theories and models because today's guest is Brandon Baylor, and he's working with a general theory of mathematical structures and their relations, relation being a keyword, which is known as category theory. And the ways this is important to all this rambling I've done so far is that he and another of our colleagues at Holon Labs, Esteban and Brandon have decades of experience in engineering. They're both graduates of MIT, and they've had a similar experience, as you'll hear in this conversation, in terms of trying to understand category theory in the ways that I'm hinting at above. They wrote a book called A Categorical Defense of Our Future, which does this really hard and frankly really bold work of trying to communicate how this theory can help us in a personal way, or how it helps us think through a mental framework that might be a better fit for the complexity of the world we find ourselves in today. And they're doing that in a lot of different fields, but I mean, in this field of engineering, that's really quite a bold thing to be trying to do. So yes, Brandon is an engineer. He's worked for some of the biggest companies in the world, but he's also a person who, as you'll hear, taught himself or went out and found the people who could teach him how to understand category theory in a really rigorous mathematical form. And then he did the hard work of thinking through his own life and experience with this framework almost as a tool, and then sharing that with us and with you. That's what he and Esteban do in their book. And it's just beginning. It's a hard process. It's breaking new ground. But I think it's a really important journey. And I really am thankful to Brandon for sharing his journey here and for living his life in a way where he tries to learn and grow and be vulnerable and talk about difficult issues and at the same time live up to very high standards as an engineer and in terms of the math. So that itself is already kind of an expression of this pattern beyond the paradox. So I hope you'll read their book, have a look at it, join this discussion towards clarifying and better connecting all these ideas. And I also hope you enjoy this episode and that it feels alive and loving for you, or that life itself feels alive and loving for you today as you make your way. Thanks for being here. Hi, Brandon. So good to see you. Thanks for being here today.
You bet. I'm happy to be here.
So there's so much I want to talk to you about, and I'm going to try to start from a more personal place for me, actually, and see if we can get into this broad world of category theory. So I'm trying to do this podcast for research reasons, and there's so many different areas that I'm interested in or that meet relative to the philosophies that I'm doing and the many different kinds of work I'm doing. And it can seem overwhelming because I feel like there's so much information that is so interesting. And I try to think, how can I make all of these seemingly different areas comprehensible or connect? I just put that forward. I wonder if you see that as a possible problem relative to what category theory offers us.
Sure. So I spent the last, I think, going on 15 years working as an engineer in operations, dealing with systems, and exactly what you're saying, this multidisciplinary background that I have seen this problem at it, coming from the angle of engineering, trying to integrate different disciplines and domains across the global organization. I worked for a Fortune 500 company my whole career. It's one of the most resourceful companies, but still challenged to integrate. And how can it be that we continue to struggle putting our ideas together across different disciplines when we have so much access to resources and technology today, right? So just kind of getting to answer your question, I think that's what category theory was really designed to do in the early days. So category theory started in the 40s, right, as an idea to be able to transport concepts and theorems across the different vast domains of mathematics itself. So I think by its very nature, it's sort of meant to be that connective tissue that relates ideas together, using different methods, different ways of sort of formalizing those ideas and sharing them. So I think category theory is well positioned to be that sort of language that helps us integrate the different domains of knowledge or systems or whatever it is that we're working on. So
you've worked for a lot of really big companies. We're not going to go into all of that, but you've worked in engineering and management, solving problems, problem solving. I wonder when category theory came into the picture.
I grew up in a small town and always knew I wanted to be an engineer. I had an affinity for math and science, and I love science fiction. So I was always drawn to technology and machines and innovation and new ways of thinking. So I knew I wanted to be an engineer, but I sort of stumbled into my career in the energy industry as an engineer. I would say that my disposition to sort of resonate with category theory, I think the seeds were planted in my childhood, and maybe we can come back to that. But I think to the more straightforward answer from an engineering perspective is I had several examples as an early career engineer where I was trying to design a system in my domain, my specialty, and as happens a lot in engineering, I have to adapt to a changing requirement or a changing standard. And so I remember this one case very vividly in my early career, like second or third year out of undergrad, and I'm still learning, new engineer. And I basically had to absorb a changing requirement into my domain. I came up with a new design. It was superior from a local sense, like it was faster, cheaper, safer. And so I got rewarded for that sort of local redesign of the system. And however, even though I'm getting pats on the back, the sort of promotion, 6 months later, I get a call from a team that's like 6 degrees removed from me in the sort of workflow. And they're calling me like, what the heck? You just created all this more problem for us. And so that was an instance in my early career where it didn't sit right with me, that how could someone be rewarded for sort of a local change, and yet it impacted the whole in a it hurt performance as a whole. And so I always sort of, it
Yeah.
stuck with me. I didn't have a vocabulary or training to articulate what to do about it, other than you know make better use of meetings and phone calls and tribal knowledge, and because we didn't have like a more formal way to sort of see that the implications of when we make a local change, how does it affect the whole. And so that was one instance. I've seen many more in my career, whether it was a safety related thing or a performance related event. But I went about 10 years into my career with facing those experiences over and over again. And then I was able to go back to school. I was trained in complex engineering systems at MIT, and that was really an inflection point. And just I had a new vocabulary in how to think about systems and integration, context, complexity. And so that was a real changing point for me to be able to start attacking this problem of how we think more holistically and manage and operate complex systems.
Yeah, it's kind of amazing. You come into a new space and you have a new idea and you solve a problem differently. And this all seems very positive. It's what people want, right? It's what we're looking for.
Mm-hmm.
But that sort of sets into motion lots of different domino trains, right? And you can't really always see how it's going to change things. So this is really a fascinating thing. And I do think that, and we're going to get to it, that category theory can help us start to get a bit of a grasp on it. I guess first I'm trying to set up some problems, because that's a problem in engineering and management and business. But I think we see it all in our daily lives too. When you have certain conversations and you're trying to share certain things with certain people, and maybe you say something that sets a train of thought or an action pattern in motion that you really didn't expect, that has either better consequences or worse consequences. So I think there's a way in which we can all really understand what you just expressed. But when this happened, you weren't thinking about category theory, right? This
No,
example.
yeah.
Okay. So I wondered, did it stick with you? I mean, it obviously did, because you're telling it now, but it seems like that bothered you a lot, that you had initiated an action that then had these consequences that were difficult for people, even though you'd come at it with the right intention. Is that part of the motivation that eventually went into you being so interested in category theory? And you
Yeah.
can also feel free to go back to your childhood. Is there a way that did you have something like that in childhood too, maybe, that stuck with you?
Yeah, that's a great intersection, because it did stick with me, and it always troubled me, but I didn't know how to do anything about it. And so I took a year off to go back to school. My company sponsored me to go get this degree in complex engineering systems at MIT. So I was equipped with state-of-the-art tools and methods for trying to tackle this problem, right? And so
Yeah.
I came back to the business. I tried to apply every single tool of systems engineering that I knew and I had available. And I also around this time met my colleague and partner Esteban Montero, who, as I'm sure we'll get into, has been my key friend and colleague on this journey since that time, because he did the same program many years prior. So I had this experience where I tried to attack the problem with this new skill set around systems and complexity, but nothing seemed to work. Nothing actually scaled. And that was kind of a reckoning in my own personal reflection, because and this is where Esteban helped me, kind of held up a mirror to me. And because, I had this great experience at MIT. It was just transformational, seeing new technology, this melting pot of all these different ideas and disciplines. But then you come back to the business and the corporate sort of culture, the old pattern starts to creep in, and the short-term thinking. But if you really stay true to sort of the question of how do we think differently about this, you realize that none of the available tools actually scale or work in the way that we need to handle the class of challenges that are like volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous. Like, there is no system modeling tool out there or framework that actually tackles this. And that's really where, at the time, Esteban was working with category theory on an effort to sort of try and represent different domains in this interdisciplinary project. And that's when I first found out about it. And the kinship between what I had just learned from systems engineering, that it's all about the relationships and the connections between the components and like emergence. That's the kind of the goal, is to understand those emergent effects and unintended effects of systems that we create and intervene. And here, category theory was saying the exact same thing, but in a different language, but the same. I could see the relationship, and so I sort of that realization that nothing is available, and here's this new kind of math and science at our disposal. That was the intersection that led me to really even try to learn category theory and understand what it could do for engineering as a discipline.
So when you say solve this or the problem, is it what I'm trying to is it what I was trying to express of just feeling kind of like things are a little bit out of control, or there's too much possibility and knowledge that you can't anticipate? I mean, if you try to think about what was bothering you and when you heard about category, what it lit up in a
Yeah,
way, what's the nugget there?
I think it's all about the challenge of coordination and
Okay.
mobilizing collective action. And in a way that's because today, every time we try to do that, every time we try to integrate these different knowledge bases or databases or processes, it's always through a paradigm of, I would say, centrality. Like there's
Hmm.
always a central governing body or standard of how to call things. And the idea is that in business today is if only we could all align and agree by consensus on what to call things, then we can finally figure out how to coordinate our work efficiently. And so again, that works for certain well understood and predictable systems. But when you embrace the sort of ever changing nature of contemporary systems, the need for adaptation, and you realize that paradigm doesn't work. And so I was hungry for a way to put all these pieces together of knowledge, of data, of processes without that paradigm, like in a different way. And that's, I think, what category theory does. It sort of serves as a connective tissue to be able to relate these domains to preserve meaning as everyone's trying to put their work together and really understand what work are you actually doing when you integrate a
Hmm.
system or a database or that knowledge that you're describing. So I think that's when I say the problem or the challenge is really about coordination at all scales, not just at the level of an individual, of a team, at the say a scale of an industry, right? Like we're trying to steer collective action to be more, healthy and harmonious and beneficial to the planet and society. And we can continue to struggle to sort of to do that, even though we all understand that we need to change. So what are the structures that
Yeah.
how can we create more awareness around those reasons?
Yeah, in a way, that's what a lot of the things that we've built are trying to do is get some order and find ways to translate different worlds. I mean, we could talk about this in language or we could talk about this in humanities, but let's think about even math. I mean, math in a way is it trying to kind of do that already in a sense? Um, because what I want to kind of get at is why category theory is doing something different. There's so many different ways that we've tried to approach different problems and to integrate and to connect. But I feel like what you wanted and what category theory is doing is actually even beyond just labeling and
Mhm.
coordination is a good word. But yeah, so just to go back, had you studied math and engineering and all of this when you were younger? What was interest? What got you into that? Let's go back to your childhood first a little bit too, because I don't know much about you as a kid. I think of you as an engineer, a mathematician, thinking of all these in all these particular ways. But what were you like when you were a kid? Were you also trying to figure out the world and connect things, integrate?
Yeah, I love what you said. I think that it really started this paradigm of we have today of like wanting to label everything and think in a
Mm-hmm.
very binary, dualistic way is so embedded in the way we think and relate to one another. And so, as a child, that was something I grappled with just on a personal level
Oh.
because I was raised by a single mother and I didn't know my biological father till I was like 11 or 12 years old. And so I had this sort of question that would lingered in my mind of like, who do I label father in my family tree? I was always terrified of the genealogy project in school because I don't know,
Mm.
was it my grandfather who was like a predominant male influence, fatherly figure in my life? Was it my eventual adopted father? Was it, so I struggle with the concept of a label. Why do I have to ascribe a label to this relationship?
Yeah.
And so I always struggle with labels, right, as a child. And then the shift is in categorical thinking. Category theory isn't about labels, like set theory is about, is it in the set or is it not? That set
Mm.
theory is sort of the traditional foundation of math for the last 100 150 years,
Yeah.
where we put things, we assign things membership, right, based on a label. And category theory is the opposite. It's like, describe the role that the thing plays in my life. Like, what's the role that, I don't care what to call this person.
Mm.
I want to understand what's the relationship they have to me, and can I define things based on the relationship to other things. That's called in category theory, they call it the Yoneda perspective, because
Oh.
one of the most powerful results in category theory was this Yoneda lemma, which says you can define an object basically by its relationship to other things, rather than trying to define an object by its intrinsic characteristics or its membership to a group. Is it in or is it out?
Mm.
Define it by how it relates to everything else. And that's the sort of like philosophical shift that really grabbed me. Go
Let's
ahead.
sit with this a bit because this is powerful. I think that as kids we do learn that, right? It's something that we learn. It's that we learn we should categorize and label things. There's all these kind of ways in which society is structured that does label and where you feel like you need to be a member. I think
Mm-hmm.
it's part of what motivates a lot of our adult behavior too, is that initial feeling as kids like, okay, we have to fit, we have to be members, we have to be labeled. And at the same time, all of us kind of know that no one label fits to anything, even in family relationships. So yeah, I guess I want to kind of dig into that just a little bit more because I think it's a place people can connect. Do you remember having the sense that things didn't fit in to labels easily, or was it more a personal sense of you feeling like maybe it did for everyone else, but not for you?
Yeah, I mean, this was something I maybe didn't articulate it this way as a kid. I
No,
didn't
of
have a
course not.
vocabulary, but I sort of internalized it in different ways. And this is what category theory has meant to my life. Basically, is this sort of, sometimes you have this sort of. I mean, that was a traumatic experience. I would
Yeah,
dare to say, as a child, and
I think so.
and you tried, as you grow older, you try to reason about everything intellectually, and it's like, if I can think through this using my brain and my mind and my intellect,
Mhm.
I'll kind of relate to this suffering. I can deal with it. But I think what that shift in perspective that category theory offered me was like the capacity to just let go of the words, of the labels. Sometimes there are no words to articulate and relate to that trauma or that suffering or that experience. And that's what category theory was inviting me to do, because it's like the most abstract branch of mathematics. It doesn't actually care about the content or the label. It's all about the structure and how you encode meaning in that structure. And so here's this new language, that sort of give me that spirit of non-conceptual, like embracing the non-conceptual and thinking at,
Mhm.
not even thinking, but like just, something that words can't describe. You can't label this graph. Categories are represented as graphs often, but so yeah, it really spoke to me in that sense, how I related to the world, and just let go of trying to find this ground to stand on through those challenging experiences.
It's an interesting kind of intersection, though, because when I think of you and when I was reading this part of the book, a boy who doesn't have a father already, there, and your grandfather sort of took on
Mm-hmm.
that role, and
Mm-hmm.
you had a cousin who made it clear that you weren't actually
Uh,
part of that group, that immediate group, like her father. It wasn't a
yeah,
cousin, it was your aunt who was really young.
that's right.
Yeah,
That's right.
so and she made it very clear that like you're not part of this group. You're not he's
Right.
not your father. You're not that, that's not your label, but he's your grandfather. You're like, it's almost like pushing you, just as kids do. I don't.
Yeah.
So when I think of this boy in this situation, I imagine you have these kind of conflicting things of, first of all, you start to realize you're the man in your little group with your mom. That's a kind of like almost like you need to find some way to control the situation or something. Also, just that was probably really traumatic and difficult, and you need to find some way to get some grasp or control. Control comes in, like it feels very
Mm-hmm.
precarious. So I can imagine you trying to find some control, and that makes me understand why you might go towards engineering and maths,
Mm-hmm.
because that's a way to control the world and understand the world and look into things and understand how they work. So I'm just putting that out there, but how did the engineering part come into being?
Yeah. Well, I came back from my training at MIT, learning about complex systems, and was trying to apply, and well, I remember Esteban was using category theory and a knowledge graph technology to try and develop a new technology, and it was a real testament to his leadership there to be able to even bring that into a corporate setting in the first place, because it is so
Let's just say
nascent and
Esteban, who
controversial.
co-authored a book with you, A
Yes,
Categorical Defense of the Future,
yes,
is a quite a powerful force in the world. And he's been on the
yeah,
show before, but yeah, just go ahead and say that.
yeah. No, thank you. I mean, he meeting him was an experience, and we can talk about that as well, because I think
Yeah, we
it
will.
relates a lot of this.
Hmm.
But so he introduced me to category theory and from the engineering perspective, and and no one else really understood what it was doing, like what it could do, what it was, but they trusted Esteban because he's Esteban, and I was intrigued. I was again, for all this sort of latent sort of things inside of me had sort of, okay, I'm intrigued. I want to try and understand this, and I struggled for many months on my own trying to self study. I was watching videos of David Spivak, lecture on category theory, and
Was he
watching
actually at
videos.
MIT with you guys, or was that just you met him later,
I
or...
I met him later. Yeah,
Okay.
I think it was. I had come to MIT a little after he had left. I think so. We missed
Hmm.
crossing paths in that sense, but afterward connected. And I was watching videos of Eugenia Chang, who has really
Oh
popularized
yeah.
category theory
Hmm.
in a more broad sense, which is just beautiful. Her exposition is fantastic. So I was building this intuition without knowing how to apply it yet to engineering. And so it wasn't until I Eswaran Submarinian,
Oh.
Professor Sub, Carnegie Mellon. He's a professor at Carnegie Mellon, and Spencer Briner, a mathematician at NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, that I had a shepherd, kind of someone with who knew this domain that could sort of help guide me through it and teach me and really describe how this might work in industry and in engineering. So I really needed that guide to take the next step forward. Otherwise, I was struggling. So
You've had some amazing guides in your life, and I want to get to them, but I was really like, I really wonder, as a child though, did you care about taking things apart and trying to put them back together? And like before you met Esteban, before just at the very start of it into your schooling, was that just by chance that you ended up already in that group of people that then sort of have definitely
yeah,
changed your life? But yeah, can you kind of connect those parts a little bit?
yeah, yeah. I was just interested in the whole notion of engineering, and because I love that, as you were saying, I was very driven by control and like I want things to work a certain way. I love structure. I'm very disciplined, and
Okay.
so
Even as a kid, were
engineering.
you taking your bike apart and stuff, or like what? How did it manifest? Do
I
you
don't
remember?
know. Yeah, I don't. I never really. Yeah, I guess it
What
was
did you
all sort
like
of
as
in
a
my
kid?
head. I love playing chess. I love
Okay, there we go.
video games. I
Yeah,
loved so yeah, chess is like very formal. There's rules. You know how
yeah,
what you're allowed to
definitely.
do, what you're not allowed to do. It's
Hmm.
sort of I loved competition. I played a lot of sports, and
Yeah.
but I think this is an important point, right? Like I sort of had this challenging experience as a kid, and I sort of internalized it. I internalized it as perfectionism, right? And like
Okay.
need for control,
That's what I'm trying to get a
and
view of. Where did you
yeah,
feel safe, and what kind of
right.
activities made you feel safe? So
But the switch, right? Like how'd you go from that sort of utilitarian view of the world to category theory, like completely open?
yeah,
Well, I think that I was sort of born into this like feeling of inadequacy my whole life, because I'm wondering, like, is there a person out there that doesn't want me, doesn't love me? And so
yeah, yeah.
I was always seeking that sort of validation and through perfectionism. And so I wanted to be the best at whatever I did, whether it was wrestling or baseball or school or.
Mm.
But then in my late teens and early 20s, I sort of had these series of experiences that just bring you to your knees, basically.
Oh,
Like, and you have no choice but to sort of confront that
yeah,
that place, right? Of I would wouldn't call it failure now, but like, yeah, I mean, just suffering and challenges, and whether it's relationships or you didn't achieve a goal, and you just reach these places where you have to sort of uh, radically accept that the control is an illusion, basically, and to let go
hmm,
of the ground that you think you're standing on, and appreciate that there is no ground to begin with.
yeah.
And that, so I had that experience that
Can you tell me
propelled
about
me in.
one of them? Or, I mean, because
Yeah,
I was thinking of that when I was reading the book, that there's a way in which, even trying to learn about it in a sense, like these things aren't separate. There's a kind of discomfort
Right.
and a challenge about trying to get to the point where category theory becomes abstraction in a way that's empowering. So I was wondering, like, it's almost as if experiencing something like what feels like defeat in the moment before you have these tools to understand it, or failure, or loss, is a kind of
Mhm.
portal into this space in a way. I don't know. So maybe
No,
can you think
absolutely.
of one that it
Yeah,
doesn't
I
have to
mean,
be specific, but
sure. I had a really, I was a devoted wrestler my whole high school career.
oh
And
wow.
so many years building up to win the state championship, right? There's a goal. And I had like the most, just the closest match in the state championship final in my junior year. And it was just heartbreaking, right? Because you literally spent years training and
Yeah.
preparing for this moment
It
and
feels like
to
your whole
not,
life at that time too. I mean,
yeah. And
it is in a
so,
way.
that was one. And then there's other things, losing relationships and just other social things.
So that
And
kind of
also with
broke you
me, like,
open even more.
yeah, I think it all came together with sort of my confrontation with religion. Like I was raised Catholic, a pretty devout Catholic family, and I was sort of the first to sort of break away from that. And
Mm,
that was a heavy moment for me, right? Because your disappointment from my family, and how do I, that was a true, you turning point for me, because I had upended my whole framework on how I organized my life, right? And so
oh yeah,
that
that's
was a
really
moment
hard.
where I
Yeah.
broke open, as you say. And I started to, I didn't have anywhere to turn to sort of that find that comfort. And so I think it materialized as like, I turned to like, I meditate now and I'm very Zen now, but I didn't know about it until later, much later in my life. I use weightlifting and like the gym as
Mm,
that sort of place where you start building the capacity to see through your own delusions in a way. Like you go to the gym and there's no flattering, like there's no, you can't, the barbell doesn't lie, so
mm,
it became this daily practice for me of kind of self disenchantment. Like it's not about attaining something, it's about just measuring your own sincerity of how you express yourself. And you do it for yourself. And that was sort of my meditative practice in the into my 20s, that I think helped me sort of be able to lift the veil of those self-defense mechanisms that would prevent someone from leaning into category theory. That's kind of the point, right? That
yeah, exactly.
the leap I'm trying to make is that to really embrace the philosophy and spirit that category theory provided me, I had to be able to see through my own self-defense mechanisms, right? And
Yeah, isn't that
um,
interesting? And it's also like
yeah,
what you described as a kind of discipline and ordering and rules, which I feel like that's also very important in the category theory and to you in it. So this is really interesting to me. This it's not a dichotomy, but this that discipline brings a kind of ability to open and feel more freedom. Um,
mhm,
Even the weightlifting, right? It's like discipline and it's daily, but you can have some control at the same time and you can develop a different way of being in the world. I
mhm,
don't see that as completely different from what
right,
something like category theory can
right.
do, but
Yeah, I think, a lot of people, it's a mode of self-improvement, which is fine. Like, but for me, it became a way to study the self, so that way I could sort of forget myself and see how I'm related to everything else in that sort of categorical way. And that's what category theory gives you: discipline and formality and rules, but it's at like a higher level of abstraction. It's more about studying the connections and how we relate to one another. So I needed that sort of practice to be able to be open. I think that mentality prepared me for category theory in a way that it otherwise I wouldn't been able to see, have that meta kind of awareness of
mhm.
um yeah, how what it can do for me in the terms of engineering or life, or so on.
That's something too that helps when we have these hard situations like the one with your being, not having your father around. And being seen differently because the majority of people sort of fit into these little labels, and when you don't, you do start to realize, oh, there's actually a lot of different perspectives and ways from which the world can be viewed. It gives you a kind of it's not a secret knowledge, but I mean there's a kind of power in once you can sit with that space realizing, oh, it's not how everyone thinks it is actually.
Hmm.
um but I want to, like, we'll come back to the personal stuff, but I want to really think because category theory is very practical and rule based, and
Hmm.
it's very disciplined. So let's try to link like, okay, so you had this childhood with a lot of really rich, difficult, beautiful experiences. And then you did end up going to college. You did excel. I mean, you have excelled quite a lot in your life in a lot of things. And you ended up in this environment in MIT where you had these very successful, um, fascinating people like Esteban sort of obviously noticing you because he would say the same about you that, he saw something in you. So, um, let's go to that moment. Had you studied a lot of maths before then? Was it a totally new to start thinking about math, or was that something you were familiar with, like other things like
Yeah.
other kinds of math and programming and
Yeah. This was a part of the journey, I think. And I had the very traditional engineering curriculum in school, right? So calculus and algebra and so on. So nothing prepared me in my education for how to think in this sort of new abstract way. Not that it's
why?
hard, it's
Can you
just
help me
unfamiliar.
understand what those were like for someone who's never had that kind of stuff? Like, what is that training like? Like,
I mean,
what was that
I
world?
had to I had to basically forget a lot of what I had learned, like the ways I was taught to think of math as a very utilitarian. There is an exact answer to an equation. There is one objective truth to a math problem. Like
So
that's
all
sort of
these
the
other maths and all these other ways you'd been learning in engineering, all of them were built on that idea that there's one answer, there is a center,
right.
and all of this.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, and because that's it from the lens of engineering, it's problem solving. We have a problem to solve. We're very
Yeah.
practical, utilitarian. We don't have time to just sort of represent all these diverse views. Let's just focus on this one problem. We got the business to run. So I had to sort of unwind that conditioning I had over the years. And I mean, I remember my first conversation with Spencer Briner. Like, he's like, do you know what a monoid is? Do you know what a group is? Do you know, like, he's listing all these algebraic terms that I had no clue.
Oh,
And
well.
at that moment, I could have ran away and ran in the other direction because it's like,
Most people
this
probably
is
would
all.
have.
But yeah, I was intrigued and I just had to keep going back. Like I had to buy books on like basic algebra. Like what does it mean to think algebraically? What is algebra? The study of equations. Okay, I remember equations. I appreciate 3x minus 11 equals 10, and there's a procedure to solve for that x and that that. Okay, so I had some intuition of algebra, and basically what category theory is like a vast generalization of that. We've kind of forgotten like eighth grade algebra. That was like the ending point, and then we did all this like problem solving utilitarian type of math. Like, but if you stay with that algebraic idea and you extend it not just to symbols, x's and y's, but to structures like patterns and connections and networks of things that are connected, what's the algebra of how to relate different networks together?
Hmm.
And that's sort of the idea. The equation isn't a symbol as an x or y. It's the abstraction is like comparing paths in a network and comparing whether or not they may not have the same labels, but they have the same structure. So you're given this more nuanced way to compare things, and at the structure, the level of structure, like that's the abstraction that's really powerful in category
So this is
theory.
kind of interesting. Hard for maybe for me a bit because I don't know math so much, but it sounds like, I mean, I would have thought algebra is very different from category theory because I think maybe the way I was taught that it's very linear and there's only one answer. But actually, as you were saying that, I was realizing there's always many, many ways that you can solve any problem, actually. So if you take it in that big scope, right, you do actually, it already is many different paths, but is what happens that in math, it feels like what category theory would open, which is that there's many completely different paths to a similar goal.
Mm-hmm.
In the same way we were talking about, there's many different perspectives as a kid. There's no one being a kid with two labels of mom and dad. So I feel like math would kind of most maths would go that route of linear and everything has a membership in a place. But you're saying algebra doesn't do that, right? Am I understanding that right? Okay.
Yeah, no, I think category theory is like the algebra of algebras in a way. It gives you rules for like relating different algebras and relating different domains in math. So it sort of sits at like a higher level than like set theory or topology or group theory, whatever domain you want to look at. But
Because
it's
those
using
things
that
are
same,
putting
yeah,
things into labels, right? So something like set theory, there's members and there's definite groups. Is that right? And that's just
right.
the way it
Like
is, or
those fields of math crystallize to sort of form in a certain context to sort of reason about specific problems, like mathematically with logic and rules. And so they were kind of each specialized to sort of like group theories about the study of symmetry, and set theories, the study of membership. And category theory sort of like helps you see that, hey, there's a pattern in group theory that relates to topology somehow. And if
Mm.
I borrow this idea from group theory, I can compare things in a topological way that I before would have been too hard to sort of prove in a mathematical sense. And so, yeah, it's sort of category theory is just a generalization of that x squared equals y kind of training we all had to apply a similar procedure and rules around networks, systems of relationships that don't have any inherent meaning. You're just thinking about the connections themselves and how they relate
So
and
this is
compose.
great too, because, okay, so I feel like if I'm generalizing a lot, but the kind of maths of life has been more like linear, and you're part of groups, and that's just how it is, and you have to find a place to fit. And category theory is actually like lifting the view of that and saying, well, you're actually members of many different groups at once, depending on where you're going to look, and we can see how they're all
Exactly.
connected and how they all influence each other, which can feel like a computational explosion, right? Which is probably why we had all those very structured, like determined kind of
Right.
places. But what's confusing is when you say category, to me, that sounds like you're putting things in
Right.
boxes and
There's
members.
yeah,
So,
there
but
was an
you said
opportunity to
relational just now, so that's different, isn't it? But it is like, can you help me understand that or explain that?
yeah, I think it is confusing the name category theory, just given our the attachment of baggage to that word. I think a better term, and this is coming from Spencer and others who I've worked with, like would have been relationship theory or
Mm.
structure theory, because it's really the study of structures that compose and how can I put two networks together to form a whole. And again, maybe you can see the relationship to systems and complexity, trying to understand how we put these parts together to form a whole. And so, category theory gives you general organizing principles on how to do that. And
Mm.
what it's great about is specifying what context you're in, because what is context, right? Context is how things are related to one another. That's how I would define context. And with context comes meaning. And so it gives us like okay, I'm in this category, which is like this particular context. I know how things work. I know the logic, the rules, and then. But the beautiful part is that I can translate to another context and sort of map between them in a way that preserves structure and meaning. And so that's the real beauty of it is it's I would say context rich and content poor, whereas almost all of our other every information management system in the world, like our traditional ways of thinking, are content rich, context poor. And that's sort of the idea is that in business, I'm back to business for a moment, like in engineering, we're really good at solving problems, but we solve those problems as point solutions. Like
Mhm.
we come up with this great software or system or solution that works in a very specific context, but it's brittle and it can't adapt and compose with other things. And what category theory gives you is like the general view, like general solution, that can specify to various contexts. So it sort of is adaptive in that way and facilitates flexibility of networks.
So we can think of categories as relations
It's like a
for,
network of
yeah.
relationships, a network of like dots and arrows. That's pretty much it.
So
Yeah, with
why
rules.
is that? I feel like thinking like that or understanding relations, and that it's not there's not this linearity, it's more almost like fractal, or there's networks of networks of networks. It's very meta. There's models of models of models and structure.
Mhm.
Like that's become very essential in a way lately, that we try to begin to learn how to think and understand that. Am I wrong about that? I mean, why is it that these other ways kind of worked pretty well, but now seem less possible? Like they don't work as well now. Is it because there's so much more connection and knowledge? Or, I mean, how do you think
Yeah.
about that?
Yeah, I think we're in a historic moment in terms of the explosion of complexity and connections that have formed in the last couple decades, really, right? With the digital revolution and the internet and the technology that we have available. It happens so fast, right? Like other sort of foundational scientific philosophical paradigms took centuries to sort of develop, and here we are within a few decades, like this explosion where anomalies are becoming the norm. There's more uncertainty and volatility than ever, and we're just not equipped to deal with complexity. And I think the common response to that is, in business at least, is, well, complexity is a problem. If we just simplify, why, we can figure it out. We can, but I think the reality is that it's not optional. Like, complexity is here. Let's start from a standpoint of confronting it, and then recognize that you need more complex tools to deal with real complexity. It's not the other way around. You know what I mean? So I think
Mm.
that that's a hard sell in our current business paradigm, but that's something that I've been trying to drive and confront in my own personal life and professional experience.
It seems something we all have to confront now, and we're trying to figure out ways to do it, even if on a personal level. When I know you have kids, and I don't know if they've gone into the social media. They're too young to be near social media, but you probably have to think about it. But so that what we were talking about of comparing yourself or not fitting in or being told you don't fit in as a kid, or all that stuff that we all know in different ways and to different degrees, does seem like that has exploded in a way where there's so many options of who you could be or what group you should be in. And
Hmm.
I feel like it can be overwhelming. And maybe we need new tools to
Yeah,
deal with it.
the way the way I think about this, as an example, is the sort of rise of social media and the apps we have available today. Like, I can go through a rabbit hole on the internet to find this little niche of like intersecting interests for me, that it becomes so specific and customized to me that I don't actually, because we don't have a way to relate that, decomposed view of my interest to, even though there's like, I like a certain type of music. Well, maybe someone likes the symphony, and on the surface, my if I'm like, I like rock and roll and like heavy metal. So like, people would
Hmm.
look at the surface and be like, if you look at this, just the label,
Mm.
like, okay, we don't have anything related here. But actually, at the structural level, what is the role that music plays in my life? It evokes a mood. It evokes a feeling. In both of those sub groups share some abstract form, and we don't have a way to even describe that today. And so what happens is, I feel like we just keep getting isolated in our own little island with no way to relate to one another. So it's sort of, I think, is driving more polarization, isolation. Now, I'm not saying the opposite. I'm not saying we need to go back to like everyone sits around in the living room and listens to the same radio station or TV channel. That's like, again, that's kind of like centrality.
Yeah, and as you said, we
We
can't
all,
really go back there. It's not a
we can't go back anyway, but that paradigm still, that's what happens, is people in business see this sort of explosion of complexity at the ground level, and their response is like, oh, well, let's just standardize. Let's all do the same thing. Why do we have to all be different? And so I think there's a middle path. Like, how can we embrace that uniqueness where everyone has their unique thing, but we find ways to relate and compose our perspective so that we can enhance that sense of belonging and feeling of relationship, right, to each other and to our context.
Yeah, it feels like it's almost like a transitional moment of trying to, you do say this in the book, you and Esteban, about it's a new way of thinking in a way. Category theory, or does it kind of help you think in a different way? And once you can start to kind of do that the same way, maybe you have to learn how to do the weight training or the wrestling or
Hmm.
meditation or these disciplines, right? There's rules, there's way to do it, but then it opens up a different way to be in the world. Would you say that is true?
No, absolutely. I think that and we've done some actual case studies with some of the leading experts in the field in this, in an industry application, right? Because we've been trying to lead the forefront of industry use of category theory, and in one of the case studies we did, we were able to show how to integrate two very different perspectives, in a way that isn't flattened, semantically, like we tend to see today. And what that means is that things can be true in one context and not true in another context, and that confrontation with the paradox, right? Like, we have to lean
Mm-hmm.
into those paradoxes and see beyond the dichotomies, as you say. So category theory gives us I think, a language and a way to actually do that in a way that's more formal and can be used in the technology, right, to be able to facilitate that philosophical shift as well. But yeah, it's kind of chicken and the egg. Do you try to get people to sort of see the philosophy of it, and because the math is maybe terrifying because it's so familiar, like the rigor of
Mm-hmm.
it, but or do you try to show them examples of how it works in practice, and then hopefully they see the foundation that it can create? That's something we've been trying to work through.
So I want to think about how this can actually help business. There's different ways we could go into that, but in having talked to you before and having read the book and stuff, one just let me generalize in a big way, but if we think of a company and different ways that a few different people could try to solve a different problem, when you have this explosion of, or things have gotten a little out of hand, everyone's working on a problem in a different way, from a different angle. We could go back to your example of when you had this great idea and then it had some consequences at a different
Mhm.
place that you didn't intend. Like, there's a way in which category theory could have helped you. By how would it have helped you? Would you have been able to visualize different possible trajectories from that place you were in?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let me describe how we've been thinking about this. So, um, I'll describe it in the abstract first. So, category theory is all about, as we said, the study of relationships. So, and one of the key ideas is this notion of composition. We use that term a lot. And what we
Yes.
mean by composition is, in a very basic, the most basic example, if I've got this object A and I know A is related to B and I know B is related to C, I can compose those two relationships through this new arrow called A to C. Like that's the I know if I know A is related to B and B is related to C, I can infer and deduct mathematically that A is
Hmm.
related to C. Category theory gives you the sort of rule system and the algebra to care, to infer that composed arrow. Because why is that important? Because that composed arrow often isn't represented in the decisions that we make, in the business models that we create, in our databases. We have all these sort of, that's why I said earlier about my example. Someone like 6 degrees, 6 arrows over from me felt the effect and had to absorb my decision. If I could have had a technology that alerted me before I made the decision to say, hey, when you do this change, you're going to impact this other team, this other person. Without the composition, without the formality that category theory offers for that network of relationships, we don't have there is no programming language today or system that would have given me that awareness, right? So that's why we think category theory is so powerful, is the capacity to understand how your local decisions affect the whole, in whether managing information or
Hmm.
processes or people, or if that's the beauty of the abstraction, it's generalizable to all aspects, and that's why I think it's revolutionary.
Yeah, it's possible. It's just how to when you were talking, I was thinking about simulation, but it's more than a simulation, right? You're not, because simulations, as I know them in my field, usually it's still feeling very linear, and maybe there's the kind of graph, but there's not the graph of the graph, so to speak, or
Right.
the way the a way of getting an idea of that there, because it does feel so overwhelming that there could be this computational explosion of so many possibilities and you can't explore all of them. But actually, this does give you a way, in a sense, to do that. And the term I was thinking of was like contradicted meaning, I think, where,
Mm.
so if you had been able to model that situation you were in from
Hmm.
not just your position, but from, let's say, the position of the people who were eventually affected by it, which was really coming from a very different trajectory, you could have
Right.
seen earlier on where those two things would have contradicted one another and caused the trouble, right? So it gives you a
Exactly.
kind of visualization of not a linear thing, but more of a ongoing network of networks. That's what's hard to
Hmm.
get our head around. But you don't
Yeah.
have
No,
to.
exactly.
Yeah. But it
Exactly.
just would have showed that, right? Is that?
Yeah, exactly. If we were all sort of representing our knowledge in this sort of categorical way, then
Hmm.
it, by definition, like I would have been able to see the effects that propagated throughout the network as I'm doing my job and trying to adapt.
Hmm.
Um, we call that we call it real-time contradiction detection, because there are very few commercial applications of category theory in software today, and one of them is called CQL, which came from Spivak at MIT and Wisniewski from MIT as well, who's been progressing it. They basically allow you to detect those contradictions on the graph in real time, basically. So if I make a contradiction, if I change my model in a way that creates a contradiction in the path of arrows, then then it tells me. And rather otherwise today I have to have tribal knowledge. I have to know the person. I have to pick up the phone and call them. We have to get in a meeting room. Imagine how there's not a meeting room big enough to sort of hold all the people who actually are impacted by our decisions. And so that's sort of where we were getting at was, um, if we could just even add a little bit of formality to the way we represent knowledge and information and data, we can have a lot of advantages in terms of performance in business.
Because those trajectories already exist. Your colleagues could already had their situation. It's just those things couldn't be kind of held in the same space. It makes me think of something like a digital twin, though, that we're trying to do now,
Mm,
where we're trying to kind of, they're called digital twins. Like, for
mhm.
example, we want to simulate the planet and possible trajectories for that planet, right? So how is what's being done now different from what could be done if category theory was able to be formalized in the way that you're talking about? Because what it makes
Yeah.
me think of is I want to have, and you do talk about this in the book, there could be some way in which all of those different positions are represented dynamically. The problem is they're often statically represented, but every change changes something else, and that I think category theory maybe could address.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we you can save the digital twin, the deep dive on that with Esteban next time. But
Okay.
I think first of all, the term twin is a bit problematic because it implies we'll actually be able to recreate an exact replica of this beautiful, unique reality in a machine, in a computer. So I think first of all that the definition is a bit problematic. But to answer your question more directly, it's really a model. You want this sort of network of models that describe a system, and what's the model for safety, what's the model for production, what's the model for XYZ. And today we don't have a way to sort of connect those models. Category
Yeah.
theory is sort of one of the ways that we could do it, to be able to say, because you have to think very clear, like that's what abstraction is doing. It's like forget all the other context that doesn't matter to this particular question I'm trying to answer, and let's reason about that it abstractly. And so if you wanted to create a model of a system, yeah, you need to look at different perspectives. And so category theory allows you to be able to say, okay, how does the model of safety relate to the model of production or to the model of lower carbon or whatever. So I think today we don't have that. And if you actually, I mean, I work on the ground in digital twin efforts, and the challenge is still data integration. How do you compose these different perspectives? Because you could look at even a simple piece of equipment like a pump in a facility, and well, the production person has a perspective, so they have their own schema. The maintenance person has a perspective. The production person, the planning person, like there's like all these different perspectives. We don't know how to integrate them, even with databases, basically, right? And so that's where category theory, one of the first applied use cases, is around categorical databases, um, representing, acknowledge. That was kind of the breakthrough at MIT with Spivak and Wisniewski, was realizing that all the data schemas and queries and databases that we deal with can be formalized categorically. Like that jump unlocks a lot of potential.
So maybe this can help me understand, because you say often in the book that compositionality is more than just integration or connection. Because I think what you just described is actually really important and nuanced, because of course we know there are all these parts that let's just think of the planet, right? Like trying to save the planet from
Mm-hmm.
ourselves or whatever might come. Let's say aliens come, whatever it is, if you try to model that, we of course know there's all these different factors, but we tend to still model it as one thing, and we just say these are connected and these are integrated. So how is like compositionality, how is it more than just integration?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it is tricky because the
It's
word
very tricky.
integration has so much historical meaning and a connotation, right? So we do
Yeah.
try to distance ourselves from it. But I think, as you say, that today we sort of are very good at decomposing things because we want to. That's kind of how we're trained. It's scientifically, like break things down into their constituent parts.
Decompose instead of compose. I think that's
Decompose.
important.
We're good
Yeah.
at decomposition. We know how to, and that's kind of gets us in the labeling again,
Reduce.
right? It's like,
Take it apart.
yeah,
Hmm.
take it apart, study each part in isolation, and then assume we can figure out how to. The aggregated behavior of the parts is what the whole is, and so I think that's sort of and today, even with integration, it's like for one specific, what's the purpose of this system? Like you said, we're trying to fend off some specific instance. But composition really gives you the rules for what's the recipe for putting things together? It's in the how, not in the what's, right? Not in, and it's
Mm.
so composition in our mind gives you not just the sort of constituent parts, but like the rules for how they come together, and how they both preserve their uniqueness but also come together to form a whole, where the sum is really the constituent parts glued together, not sort of flattened in the way that we would do it today. Because as we were saying, that the sort of paradigm of integration is always through like standardization and flattening of those perspectives. And so there's a way, I think, now to both preserve uniqueness and also show how it relates to the whole. And I think that's the beauty of composition. I think without that, you will never see those unintended consequences we're describing. So that's really why we say composition can lead to a whole new theory of design, engineering design, so that we can understand the implications of what we're doing in a
Mm-hmm.
way that we struggle with today, because our intuition isn't enough, like with the complexity we face.
And does that have to do with the center not just being one center, but the center kind of being everywhere? Is that freeing us to not have to choose between it only being this way or the other way, but
Yeah.
instead looking more at how all that relationality is going to determine in that, only in that second, that problem's best next step or the way to address it if you're in the company or something. But that doesn't mean you're going to use exactly that the next time.
Yeah, I think that the adaptive capacity of this sort of categorical approach is one of the key features. Because when you acknowledge everything is connected to everything else, when context changes in this sort of traditional paradigm, you have to like re-stitch all the wiring and connection. Like you have to go and check to make sure everything is still holds, right? It has referential integrity if the context changes. And category theory helps because if the context changes, you can map that old context to the new context with like a very standard operation, and it's known, and you kind of get stuff for free. That
Mm-hmm.
inference I was describing before, like we don't have to carry around all the arrows that we can infer mathematically, whereas today you have to carry all that baggage either in your model or in your brain, and that's where it becomes non-scalable, because you can't possibly keep track of all the connections. So we need an accounting system, as Spivak would say. Category theory is like an accounting system of meaning. What are we tracking? And yeah, it helps us. You can kind of forget all the complexity once you sort of package up an idea and kind of think at it at a higher level. That's the beauty of abstraction. Like even from, I think you mentioned programming earlier, like the trajectory of programming is like more and more abstraction. So that way we can package ideas and move them around and into units that are, we don't have to reason about sort of the lower level details. So that's kind of how it works.
Is it different from seeing patterns? I mean, is it because I could see that someone would just say, "Oh, it's helping you recognize more patterns or something." But it actually, there's two words that come up a lot that I wanted to get into a little bit, like awareness and meaning. You know,
Mhm.
you're learning a sort of practice. You're becoming more aware in a sense that you're not settling on one specific answer or one specific way. You're learning, there's a kind of fluidity or flexibility or something that's coming out of this. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think absolutely. That's why we love, Esteban and I love kind of thinking about the world of mycelium networks as a sort of an
Mm,
analogy here, right? Where you can take many paths at once, and sort of, where does the self begin and the whole begin? Where does the self end and the whole begin? Like it sort of makes you question the role of the self and the whole system. And that awareness you're describing, we use the analogy of a mirror a lot, almost in a way that it's this sort of technology that we're imagining. It's like holding up a mirror so I can see how I relate to the whole and how does my action affect others. And that would change the way I make my way through the world, right? So today because of the sort of dualistic way we're trained and thinking, it's hard to see beyond ourselves. But I think this technology can create a sort of collective awareness in a way that we don't have access to today.
how does that relate to awareness and meaning? I mean, we could even go back to something more personal because like we were talking about how right now we categorize everything and there's members and something is right or wrong and there's not a sense really of there's becoming more so, but something like family, right? I also grew up in a religious kind of atmosphere, and I think religion adds an even more. There's certain ways that things have to be done or it's wrong, and there's memberships, and there's not the sense that's one way it's done. If you zoom out, you could see how it's connected to this, and that there's another way. And part of I don't know about for you, but part of like growing up and learning how to deal with the world was actually learning that there are so many other ways from which you can see things and you can accept who you are as you are. You can find other groups where you do belong, this kind of thing. So I don't know,
Yeah.
like, how would
Well,
we
yeah.
relate it on that level?
Yeah. As you said, I think there's a huge opportunity for belonging and connection. And we don't have even, like I was saying about the example of music, I like a completely different genre. A genre is a label, right? We're
Yeah,
trying to
right.
we're trying to capture the essence of this rich musical, domain into one word, and it's just not possible. And yet that's how we label things as genres. So one genre of music may not have anything in common on the surface with another genre, but yet there is some overlap. And if we could see that overlap, it would feel like there's a belonging, even though superficially we can't recognize it today. So I do think that can help us find meaning in the world today, and because that's what I would say is awareness, is the recognition that there is a connection there. It's there. It's just tacit today. It's hidden. There's walls standing between us, and I think a lot of that is because we don't have the capacity to see beyond the dualism and all the other influences that sort of drive us to think in labels. So I hope that this whole shift in philosophy of seeing things based on how they relate to other things, and seeing that there is a new paradigm, a new science and philosophy about it that's growing, can help people find meaning, because I think that's what it's all about.
I think this will probably end up changing the way business is done. That's one level. We haven't talked about it a lot, but it's new, right? And it seems to be a little harder to get your head around. And that, I know that's one reason maybe people in business might take some time for everyone to accept it, because it's really like shifting gears in a sense. But do you think there's also an element of it being scary in the sense that you have to realize there's not only one path, there's always many
Yeah.
right paths?
Yeah, I think this has been my experience as well. And I think trying to tie a lot of these threads together is that the way we operate today, I think, is a lot of times driven by fear, and fear of the unknown, fear of the complexity, and yeah, just recognizing there is no ground to stand on. So I think that it's going to be a tremendous challenge to sort of, because this is why I'm so keen on like the analogy of the mirror and the studying the self, because as an industry level, we have to sort of see through our own self-defense mechanisms, that because we put up labels to sort of deal with the fear, right? And
Yeah.
like illusion of control again.
Yeah.
Is it good or bad? Like, just simplify it for me so I can feel better about
What's the right
the
way to go?
decision.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's this like seduction of control, and but I think it is going to be challenging sort of for our conventional sort of paradigms in business, but I think that's why Esteban and I are trying to open a new path of discourse and a new sort of community that lives between research and business. And so we have our nonprofit organization, Holon Labs, and that's really where we think that it's too hard to replace the current foundation of business while they're so successful. We'll put it that way. So we've been in that arena for decades and seen the challenge firsthand. And so I think we need to grow a new path, and that's what we're trying to do. The challenge is we have this analogy. Sub and I have this analogy. It's like category theory is so unique in this way where you can resonate and come at it and feel it in many different ways. And so that we call it like um, being key makers. Like there's this sort of metaphor in India, where Sub is from, where there's like 1,000 doors, and like it's a maze with many paths, and not all of them are real. And so like for each person we engage with, they have a different door that they have to go through to sort of see what we see, whether it's the personal side or the engineering side or the mathematical side. It's
Mm.
that's the fun and the challenge of it, because there's the intersection of so many different things. It's fun though to be able to flex the ideas and meet so many different communities. So
I do wonder what motivates you. I mean, do you seem to have a sense of responsibility about it or something? I mean, it's almost like you've seen a better way. Esteban too,
yeah.
and you really want to share it with people. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, I think that once you see this as sort of the call of our generation, the call of our time, I there's no going back. And I feel compelled every day to put every fiber into this and try to develop a new scientific and philosophical paradigm for systems and integration. Um, I'm hesitant to say that I have a goal of making things better. I
Mm.
like to approach it by appreciating what we have, and sort of just seeing things as they are, and seeing the beauty in what we have today. But I do want to develop more harmony and more healthy systems and more relationships. I think more relationships lead to belonging and meaning. And I think, yeah, once I had kids and felt this like sense of responsibility for what future they're going to inherit,
Yeah.
it became something I can't put down now.
I think that's why I brought the awareness and meaning in, because There's so many levels to talk about this, the mathematical, the technical, the management, and those are all very important, but there's a real personal way that it affects you, or one, a person. You start to become, of course, all those relationships are already there. And as we were talking about, a lot of it is this vulnerability or fear or just being overwhelmed by the world that you can't see all those relationships or fill them or experience them fully because of all of that. So once you have a better way of being aware of them, that the awareness itself opens your experience. And I wonder, I mean, we could go back to when you met Esteban and all these people that have been so important in your life, but also remembering you as a little kid, and now you're a dad to two young kids, and you seem very much, your relationship is very important in your family and your life. Seeing this in your everyday life, this awareness and meaning increase due to this new way of thinking that's probably come in other ways too, but is really visible in category theory.
Yeah, absolutely. I love this question, and I'm going to eventually relate it to meditation, but I'll kind of build up to that
Okay.
by saying, yeah. So meeting Esteban was sort of transformational for me in and of itself because, as I said, even me, I was sort of, everything around me was sort of driven by goal-seeking behavior and control and getting things done, accomplishing things, attainment. Like my whole life has been, well, the early 20, 30 years of it has been like that. But then I met Esteban and he was like the complete opposite. I had never met a person like so developed, honestly, like not just intellectually, but emotionally, spiritually, and someone who could have gone and excelled at anything, but chose to go not just stay in the trench of like this effort, but like jump out of the trench and run towards the bunker kind of like on his own. It was just I was
How did
just
you witness that? How did you see that in him? It sounds like you saw it pretty early. Do you remember seeing that first, or?
well, I was at MIT and they brought him in to speak to our class because he had gone through the program. And so he was the only
Okay,
person in the company who had this experience. And so
I
like, hey,
see.
come in and give these new scholars some feedback on the program, what to expect. And yeah, and I just remember he and I met personally later on and sort of we both studied under Nancy Levison, who was like
Mm.
system safety expert at MIT, and she's reinventing the world of system safety. And but her philosophy kind of stuck with both of us, and we started finding these little philosophical overlaps, and it became this deep connection. But yeah, I was a little skeptical at first, honestly, the first time I met him because he was touted as like the smartest guy in the company, basically, and so immediately I was like a little
Yeah.
skeptical. But I never saw him lift a finger in terms of modeling something or computing, like, but yet he would drop these knowledge bombs like in out of nowhere, and it's just like I'd go and do the homework. That's where I kind of like started to differentiate, I think, myself a little bit. Was
Mm.
he would drop these kind of bombs on a meeting in terms of just challenging the current paradigms, right? And you're like, whoa, who says this sort of thing, and is he right? Can that be true? And we had these kind of very rich sparring sessions, and then I just realized that, yeah, this guy's the real deal, and his range of knowledge and experience, and it's not just intellectual. Like what really, this is where I'm getting to meditation. It was really in his capacity to stay open. I saw that I had the same. I had all those life experiences I was describing to you. I could sort of put together and sort of help him on this journey. And so what's beautiful about it is I think what the paradigms is, because we're talking about fear, we're talking about how does this change business, how does this relate to category theory, is that for me it's about not living a fear-driven life, and it's about being fully open and awake and fully participating in life in ways that I didn't want to look back at my whole life and say that I was driven by fear and the unknown. And so I think seeing a person as developed as him, I call him like, kind of like my Roshi in the early days, like my teacher, but he always treated me as an equal, and we have been partners in that way.
Hmm.
But he helped me sort of be able to step back and be fully alert on all things. And that's what category theory, I think, also does, is it allows you to sort of separate, like get this meta awareness of how things are related and how does the self sort of relate to the whole. And so I think that's been transformational for me, that awareness, right? Because without that awareness, yeah, you'll slip back into the old patterns of behavior. And I've convert this to conclude my long spiel here. I had this sort of discipline of lifting weights, right, as a meditative practice in a way, but it
Hmm.
wasn't very then I found Zen, and we were going to Dharma talks together, and I actually started
Oh,
sitting
did you?
meditation. This was one of those metaphorical mirrors that he would hold up for me. And like, we would have these really hard conversations about the trauma in our life and the suffering. And
Mm-hmm.
he would be like, why do you have to label it? Because I would say something like, well, I'm glad this happened to me because I'm better for it. And he was just like, can you just sit with it? Just let the pain be. Can you not label it? Can you approach it without judgment? And that was a moment, an inflection point for me. And I realized I needed to develop a practice around staying open, because it's so hard to maintain that without a regular commitment to a discipline. So that's why I turned towards sort of sitting meditation. And I think it gives the same effect as category theory, in the sense of understanding the self so that you can forget yourself and see how you're related to the whole.
Mm-hmm.
So and that's sort of that idea of emptiness, right, that we have talked about a lot before. So
Mm-hmm.
I have experienced it in my personal life, that awareness, and I can know when I'm spinning back into these patterns that drive the current structures that we live in.
It's another relationality. It helps to have people around you who are who are also trying to open and stay vulnerable, or who also are at least trying to sit with the awareness, the discomfort, trying to see from other positions, because I do think it's very challenging, and it relates to the way that category theory is itself. It's a pretty small group of people still working on it, even though it has this transformative quality, and there is resistance trying to bring it into business. There's resistance, and there's good reasons for all of that. But in a similar way, once you start opening to the world, it does get easier, but at the same time, you do encounter resistance, because maybe you're entering situations where you can't explain fully kind of all of this stuff, but you're still going to follow through with it. Maybe you're not checking the same boxes that everyone else would have checked in that membership, and in the if you're staying in the old kind of way of looking at it. Do you feel like this is an ongoing thing for you, or is it, because sometimes when you talk, I feel like it's so easy for you now or something, but you're not saying that, right? Or are you?
No. I mean, it's incredibly difficult in terms of just staying in the tension, right, of the current business paradigm and then this new way that we're trying
Mm-hmm.
to crack open. We've touched on this, right? Like, I'm not sure it's going to happen from the inside. I don't know if a business is going to ever adopt fully the what's available, but and so I guess what that means for me is I may not live to see this come to fruition. Esteban
Yeah,
and I
I
have had
think they
many
probably will,
conversations.
but
If we don't have we don't have something we're trying to attain to be happy, right? That taking the
yeah.
journey is itself enough, and the fact that we even started the journey is enough of the reward. So I think we've had to adjust our approach to staying in that tension. Otherwise, you would turn around and give up, right? Because there's so much rejection and not in a bad way, just because people aren't prepared for it, or the conditions aren't there, or but
Mm-hmm.
that's the progress of science and technology, right? The context has to be there. I think we think that there is opportunity for a transformation on all dimensions here for society. And Roman Republic wasn't replaced with democracy overnight, so it's going to take
No.
time. And I think that we're trying our best to leave a contribution that we can build on, hopefully, and really bring all the great work that the mathematicians and scientists have already been doing in the space, to really put them on a stage, so that engineers like me in the future can have a bridge to new ways of thinking, new frameworks, and to relate more directly to life, and then personally or professionally.
Yeah, I think that's the application part. That's not like the applied category theory, and starting to look at the world a little bit differently, and try, even though it's hard, to find examples that are already there all around
Mhm.
us in nature and elsewhere. But also, as you're talking, I also want to be clear that I don't think you or Esteban or anyone is saying this is the only way or something, or that it's like you found some magical thing, because it can feel like that too, as if the knowledge is somehow privileged or something. And it's not at all that. It's almost, it could be meditation, or it could be, it's more that you found something that brought you some peace and some, it's widened your life. Is that, or I don't know,
Mhm.
how would you
Mhm.
say it? How is it, it's changed your life in a positive way. And it's like, you want to share it with people, right? And in
No,
business
absolutely.
too, you can have a better business.
Yeah, yeah. A lot of the rejection that I've experienced in business and trying to promote this in a way is good, because it allows me to study the. I don't sort of fit into the flow of things in business in a way, and so because I'm a little removed, I have a way to study the inner workings of organizations and coordination and teams in a different perspective. And so I think that the challenge has also given us insights in a way, right? That it's, so I'm not saying it's not easy. It's come with a lot of work, but it's been rewarding. And the people I've met so many amazing people in the community of category theory, and people like yourself as well are trying to understand and see how we can use it and promote it. So I've acquired so many relationships that have enriched my life, and in addition to the sort of philosophy that has been transformational for me personally, it's really changed my my worldview in a short number of years. But it was hard work. I had to do the work to sit in that tension and unlearn what I had learned and think like a beginner in a lot of ways. I think that's what holds a lot of people back is yeah, they're sort of trapped in their own expertise, their own, and they can't unwind their own assumptions.
Do you think anyone could do this? Does it require some kind of special, is there a way of accessing all of this regardless who you are or what you've been through, or is there some?
Well, I think the confluence of experiences from childhood and personally, socially, tech, scholastically have all prepared me for this in a way. So maybe that's hindsight bias, but if I could characterize it, I would say the kind of ingredients are curiosity, kind of to new things like that. You can't run because it's new, and the courage to stick with it when it gets hard and unfamiliar. And yeah, so I think it's rare to find like someone who can stick with it and stay open. That's the key. Not because there's a limitation of them. It's a thing about humans and the systems that drive us, right? It's the influences and structures that people want to live a good lifestyle and they want to get promoted. So what are they going to do? They're going to solve the problem that's short term. And there's reinforcing loops that drive all that. So that's why category theory is like almost too good for its own sake, because it sort of reveals those delusions, that sort of how we operate. It sort of shows how we operate. And so that's why it's like it's almost too good for its own sake to be applied right now in industry. So we need that's why we're trying to lay a new ground to be able to build it up. I think we need to create an ecosystem of people working on this from so many different angles. There is a rich community of mathematicians right now that they've paved so much runway already for category theory and the tools and machinery. We have Eugenia Chang's done a great job sort of popularizing it in the sort of everyday language. And so there's like this void in between. And I hope that the work that Esteban and I have done and we can continue to do is build a bridge between, help people with that on-ramp that's a little more easy to get on. And that comes with tools and new frameworks as well. So I think that it's no one company, no one person can possibly do this. It takes an ecosystem. And so I hope that we can continue to grow the network in the community. I had the experience last year. I went to this thing called the Adjoint School. It's the Applied Category Theory School. I've only done it 6 times. And so that sort of shows you how new this community is. And I was the only engineer, I think, who has ever done the program. Basically, it's a 6-month seminar program where it's led by some of the leading mathematicians. And yeah, I think that was a great signal of change where the mathematicians understand to truly apply it, they need people with real domain industry experience. In industry, people like us know that there's a whole new world of technology and science to be able to support. So building that bridge, I think, is a key step, and keep laying the foundation for this new way of thinking.
Well, everyone who mentioned you or talked about you in this is always expressing a lot of gratitude, and also they seem to see you as a very strong person who can deal with a lot and handle a lot. And I guess we've talked a little bit about how you got there and what it all is, but you said something at the beginning, just to kind of close it off. You said after becoming a father, you felt all this in a different way. I just want to kind of ask you a little bit more about that too. Has that deepened a lot of this? Because hearing everyone talk about how steady and smart and responsible and all these things that you are, and that you're able to deal with challenge and sit with challenge and explain things, but you're also very good at your job, and that's what you're used to with your life. You've excelled and been good, but I guess becoming a father must have been a whole new thing. Did it open something different?
Yeah. I think one thing that has taught me about the philosophy of composition is that I try to integrate all aspects of my life. It's not, I'm a Brandon at work and I'm Brandon at home. It's like, how can I find intersections on all of this? And so that way I never feel like I'm separate, even decomposing my own life, but everything is sort of related somehow. And so, yeah, I think it's helped me as a parent in terms of the way I approach, parenting. I think an actual tangible result of my journey and of course with my wife as well. But we started homeschooling our daughter recently. So I think just this realization that there is no one curriculum to fit them all, and like the appreciation for uniqueness in an individual, even my own kids, like we can create a curriculum and an experience that is healthy and meaningful to her and my son. Eventually he's only 4, but so yeah, I think just embracing the uniqueness and multitude, like we are multitudes, and really living that through those kinds of activities like the homeschool or how we choose to relate to the kids. And also there's another example I have. The old me, like, control oriented and perfectionist, the kids draw on the wall or something, and it's like easy to get frustrated. Like, man, well, you're putting the things out of order. Like, what are you doing? And my philosophy has completely shifted in that way, because now I see that and I think of a different context where sometimes the kids go to their grandparents for a week or two and I just miss them so much. And I look at that picture that they drew on the wall, and it's like, I miss, it's like they're with me, in a way,
Aw.
because it's so that a capacity to sort of see different contexts and just see things as they are and not judge them, like rush to judge, like that ability to refrain, I think is all because of this sort of journey I've been on, and how category theory has like rewired my approach to life. So
And it's just the beginning.
it is.
It really
We're
feels
here.
like it. It really feels like it's just opening. All right,
Thank
Brandon.
you, Andrea.
Thank you.
Okay.
See ya.
Bye.
Bye.